So basically, when it comes to these narcissists, you can only give them so much. You have to identify them quickly, and you need to surmise the situation, because the narcissist is never going to tire. He's going to want to go on and on and on and suck as much energy as he can out of you. And he just feeds on that, and that stimulates him. You can only let yourself be drained to such a point. It's not you have to draw the line to be healthy, to stand up for yourself. And it's the decent thing to do. It's the right thing to do. You even are showing love to a fellow human by being honest and direct with them. It's not necessarily a bad thing to do, but it does mean that you might have to be a little mean. And most people don't like confrontation. Most people don't like being mean. You have to establish a boundary. Greetings, friends. It's already late at night, and I'm a little tired, but I wanted to tell this story before I went to bed while it's still fresh in my mind. Because today I had an encounter with a man who was maybe in his 60s and seemed to be from a Russian background. I don't know how long he'd been living in Canada, but he had sort of that accent, and he asked me if I spoke Russian. The setting was Yonge and Dundas Square. The time was just after I got back to the square after marching with 800 to 1,000 people, anti-lockdown, that kind of thing. And I was just standing there, and normally, people hang out and maybe do whatever, not everyone goes home right away. And I was just standing there out in the open, and I went over to where one of my friends was. He was talking with some other lady that I didn't know. So I was just standing there, and this man who I described had been talking with them. He was intensely talking with them, and he had a bicycle with him. Sort of an older bicycle. It didn't look great. It didn't look awful. It was just kind of a run-of-the-mill used bicycle. But and anyways, at some point he saw me, like not long after I arrived there, and he started talking to me, and this went on and on and on, and I guess he'd been talking to my friend and that other lady because all I caught in between, when my friend said to me, I think there was an interval where I was briefly talking to my friend before this Russian guy swooped in again to talk to me. But my friend said about the Russian dude, he poured out his whole life story to them. So he's already been doing this to some people right before me. This is the context. Now, he starts talking to me, and he has kind of like a soft voice, even though not like a weak voice, but like he had a lot of animation to him, and he was definitely seemed to be very interested in what he was talking about. But it was all his own little universe, his own thoughts that he was just sharing with me about how he was using the metaphor of his bicycle to sort of explain everything about how the front wheel is going into the future and the back wheel is the past, and you don't want the bicycle to fall over. And I'm just like, okay, wonderful metaphor. Thank you for sharing that with me. I didn't say that to him. I was humoring him. But the thing is, because they were playing loud music in the background, which I don't necessarily like, but I couldn't hear half of what he was saying. And this was going on for like 15 minutes. Now, normally I would just walk away. I would just okay, I can get, thank you, sir. I got to get going. But you see, I was waiting because, I hang out with my friend after the protest. We go maybe smoke a joint or something. And then before we go home, it's kind of a ritual we have every Saturday after these things. And so I had reason to still be there, but this guy is just going on and on and on. And, feeder conversation is a linguistic term. It means to feed in to what someone is saying. And you do that by saying, yeah? Oh. Right. Uh-huh. okay, I see. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, anyway, so that's feeder you just do that, and I was, I shouldn't have gotten sucked into this because the thing is, you try to not be an asshole. You try not to be a total, hard, cold exterior. You try to be human, warm, and, well, in the sense of being friendly. But I guess I should have noticed earlier that this guy is actually probably a full-fledged narcissist. Loves hearing himself talk, but likes. It's similar to the term I used before, energy sucker, and it is a form of just drawing energy out of you to satisfy their own ego, and maybe even a real kind of life force out of you because he's constantly talking about his own philosophical ideas, even though I can't hear half of what he's saying, but I kind of get. But then his worldview just seemed incoherent to me. He seemed kind of a little crazy, but somewhat intellectual people can be crazy. But I don't know how long this went on that he was talking to me for, but he was saying things like he was mentioning enlightenment, he was mentioning meditation, and eventually I started to question him on some of these things. I wasn't always just giving the feeder like, oh, okay, I did, but this was after 20 minutes because I couldn't, I had to just interject and say like a lot of what I'm hearing here is stupid, even though I can't quite make out a lot of what he's saying. He was originally asking me like, oh, do you speak Russian? Are you from a Russian background? I said, no, I'm partly Latvian background, but that's not Russia. But and by the way, his clothing was filthy. Like he was wearing just some long-sleeved gray shirt and maybe some other shirt underneath it, but both were just pockmarked with tears and holes. Like not like a homeless person or anything like that, but just some guy who really maybe lives in some weird place and just doesn't take care of his clothing or his. I mean, his appearance was all right. He was clean shaven, but he kind of like, I wouldn't say wild eyes, but just like, his eyes were, they were a little big, and so there was a lot of I keep using the word intense. There was a very intense energy to this guy. But I mean, I asked him like, oh, are you into Gnostic ideas? And he said, well, no, like that means different things. And so I couldn't really quite figure out what this. I don't think this guy had a coherent worldview. I think he was just babbling on. And I mean, that's okay. Like, the average person isn't going to have a coherent, worldview. But the thing is, he was just on a whim, like just saw me and just started like pour out this whole thing to me. And eventually I did start questioning him on some of these things. I'm like, well, meditation, I used to do that when I was younger, but quite frankly, man, I mean, I think you can even get demons coming into you if you meditate. Not always, but I mean, and the whole enlightenment thing, that's just leading you astray. And his main way of understanding things was knowledge, like, oh, it's all about knowledge. And he was saying we've come to a better place now than we were in the past through technology but I was like, well, how do you know we didn't have better technology 4,000 years ago? I mean, I'm not saying we do, but we don't really know much beyond a few thousand years ago. I mean, there is religion and to teach us certain things, but we can't really say as individuals like, oh, this is how it was, and so I just basically questioned a lot of his presuppositions, as we would call it, your things that you take for granted. This guy was full of things that he just took for granted, but he had such poor social skills that he probably never had many people to really tell him that. But basically, I think I know it's not really too important to discuss this guy's philosophy. It's more just like the narcissistic personality that I'm trying to paint here in this video, or at least a certain aspect of the narcissistic personality. I know there's lots of things you could say about narcissists. I'm showing you a particular angle in this video with this character. But basically after 45 minutes, I was like, all right, man, I gotta be on my way here, and then I made it clear that I was going to be moving on. I wanted to end the conversation, which was really mostly a one-way street with him just, barraging me and for his own ego fulfillment. And by the way, when someone does that to you, they camouflage it by saying, well, like, what's your background? How would you have an outlook on this? And I said, well, I've sort of been influenced by the Orthodox worldview, and I think I believe in hierarchy and order and tradition and the Bible too. But you can't. I was telling him, like, you can't just take Bible script, like, verses here and there and just like, who are you to interpret this book on your own? Because that's what so many people do. They just like bring up, they can make the Bible say whatever they want, and it's just it's a ridiculous system. It's an incoherent system to operate in. It just doesn't make sense. And if there's truth and there's logic in the world, and there's an objectivity ultimately in the world, when we speak of truth, where does logic come from? What is good? What is evil? Then you inevitably end up with God. And but anyways, I don't mean to go off on that. But that's sort of how I was trying to sort of question some of the things he said. But eventually, it's like after 45 minutes, or maybe it was only half an hour. I couldn't really tell, but it went on for something at least that long before and then he's like, oh, okay, but let me just tell you one more thing, and then he's like, still talking. So clearly this guy cannot read social cues. And eventually I just like walked away from him, like, okay, man, see you later. And then he sort of, because I only moved like 10 yards away. Just now I was like standing with my friend. My friend, like, he gets in the conversations too, because Dundas Square, there's like all sorts of characters there. This is not unusual that I encountered, some weird narcissist at Yonge and Dundas Square. It's, a lot of the city, it's pretty messed up. The sort of people that come out of the woodwork, that just come out of the, they materialize. It's something about the energy there. But anyways, I'm waiting for my friend, because I don't want to, be rude, but he's having a conversation with another woman. Actually, no, I was talking, they had been talking with the Russian guy, so they started talking with me. I told them, like, oh yeah, I think that guy's a narcissist, but the guy, actually, no, sorry, I'm mistaken. Sorry, I'm kind of tired right now. That did happen, but before that happened, the guy actually came back to me a second time, because he saw me standing there still. So he only gave me like a 1 or 2 minute break. Just a little break, like, oh, he went off a little bit, saw me still standing there, and came back and said, oh, I want to ask you a few more things, like, just, and then just went on. And then by that point, so now you can see, now the game is different. I was being nice. I was like Michael Douglas in the movie Falling Down, even though that movie may be subversive. I tried to be nice in the beginning. I listened. I surmised. I was polite. I listened to all your crap, whether there's some truth in it or not. While he did ask, just ask you the semblance of a question, but they don't do it, because as soon as they ask you something and you start to say something, immediately they're back on their tangent. He's back on his tangent about whatever. So that's how they camouflage what seems to be a conversation, but is not a conversation. They camouflage it by breaking the monologue, breaking them directly, conveying their sentences about stuff they want to talk about to you. They break it up with asking you some questions, and you respond immediately. They're back on their tangent. They weren't really listening. They're not really listening to anything you're saying. So they're just... But you see, that's why this guy's somewhat psychopathic or sociopathic, because he has the intelligence of language to a certain degree, so that a less advanced person intuitively or in language, they might hear this guy talking and they might not pick up on it right away. But I start to see now that he's a psychopath to some extent, and this guy's like could be, who knows, dangerous. So I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say, oh, he's not dangerous, but yeah, really, really messed up mindset. And so he comes back to me a second time. Now the game is different. Now it's like, okay, buddy. So I listened to him for just a short breath more, and then I was like, I started just being honest with him, like, well, sir, you've been talking on for 45 to 55 minutes, maybe an hour. I don't really know how long we've been standing here, and honestly, I haven't heard half of what you said. You've kind of a weird, soft voice, but also the music earlier, I couldn't hear a lot of what you were saying. But I mean, you basically you've gone on and on. And you don't seem to have very good social skills. And I think you just have a big ego. Oh, and by the way, I told him that I thought he had demonic possession, because he was telling me, well, you think he had some experience where he said he was on a line. He was pondering all about the dead and the blind and the injured, or some category of person who's like not in a good place, like something like that. He was like, why do bad things happen, kind of along those lines. And he was pondering that, and then he had some sort of visionary experience where he said he was in his mother's bed. I don't know if he means that literally or in a dream. I'm not quite sure. Well, he said not like a dream, like he had a real experience where he's on some bed somewhere, and then he looks to the wall of the bedroom, and there's, through the wall, he sees some figure who he said was Jesus, or feels the presence of some spirit of either God or Jesus, saying to him, "You have been contemplating the dead and the blind. You are dead." Yeah, what a messed up thing. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm sure that's God and Jesus. I think that's a demon. And I told him, I'm like, look, man, I honestly think you probably somewhat demon possessed, and I don't know, maybe you need to find a priest or something. You need to talk to a priest or something. Like, geez, like, I don't know about this stuff, but honestly, man, like, and so I was trying to tell him, like, how do you think, like that was God or Jesus, like, but you're just interpreting on your own standard. And anyways, like, I'm just tired, and at one point I was just like staring at him, like having this kind of like staring into his eyes, and he was staring right back at me. And normally I can stare people down after 10 seconds or so. People get scared of that, but I only do that in a situation where I know that someone's like psychologically trying to mess with me. But then I noticed that this guy's going to stare right back at me, because he's not actually. So I couldn't actually beat this guy in a staring contest, but we were staring at each other for like 30 seconds to 40 seconds probably. Just like, and he was still talking, but we were just. I mean, maybe this sounds even kind of gay. It's a stupid situation to be in. Like, but I was trying to stare the guy down. But I noticed that this guy's so fucked up that he can't read social signals, and I actually think this guy has some big demon in him that when I looked into his face there, it was messed up. Like, his eyes something was like almost like in his forehead, like, and no wonder these people talk about the pineal gland and the enlightenment, and it's all based on BS. It's all BS mostly, but it could be that there's some sort of demonic energy that focuses in that part of their head, and because the way the guy's eyes are looking, it's almost like they're sort of almost drawing his eyes to the top of the head. It's kind of hard to describe this, but I told him, like, you have terrible social skills, and like just like get out of here, and he still tried to talk to me for a little bit more, and then he just went off. But so I told my other friend and this lady about it, and they were like, yeah, they agreed with me. So it wasn't just my take on this guy. They agreed with me that he was, definitely something was wrong with him, and so it's almost like the situation we're in right now, where people are obedient to whatever the government tells them to do. I'm not saying normally it would be a good thing in the society to be in harmony with the government. But what I'm saying, the government today and then the corporate media and people just go along with it on no well reasoned or no spiritually good principles. They go along with it, and their obedience actually prolongs this nightmare. So in a similar fashion, when the narcissist is abusing a victim, you have to identify what's going on as early on as possible. And like I said, I started to identify what was going on after maybe 10 or 15 minutes. But I did stand there and allow myself to be further drained. But I explained to you why that happened, because of the circumstances. Otherwise, I would have just gotten out of there. But given the circumstances, knowing that I'm not sure how much longer I'm going to be here, and finally, so basically, when it comes to these narcissists, you can only give them so much. You have to identify them quickly, and you need to surmise the situation, because the narcissist is never going to tire. He's going to want to go on and on and on and suck as much energy as he can out of you, and he just feeds on that, and that stimulates him. You can only let yourself be drained to such a point. It's not you have to draw the line to be healthy, to stand up for yourself. And it's the decent thing to do. It's the right thing to do. You even are showing love to a fellow human by being honest and direct with them. It's not necessarily a bad thing to do, but it does mean that you might have to be a little mean. And most people don't like confrontation. Most people don't like being mean. You have to establish a boundary. That's what this lady told me, who had had the interaction with him as well, the Russian guy. She had and she said, yeah, it's good that a lot of people don't know to establish the boundary or the border, or I forget what word she used. I think it was establish the boundary. That means being firm with them, as firm as you can possibly be, and then depending on how what their intelligence level is, they'll either understand finally or maybe not. But because this guy was probably a slightly higher IQ. That's why he probably, but terrible social, because people with high IQs, they can often be autistic, and I wouldn't say this guy wasn't autistic, but no, his social skills were horrible. But when I told him that, he said, he was his countenance did change, I did, have some effect on him, because maybe he was still thinking that I was a friend or something of him, but even though to treat someone that way is not like what any friend would do, complete stranger anyways, or even some friend very well, that's not how you should behave. But his countenance did change, and I asked him at one point, do you has anyone ever told you this before, what I'm telling you now, that you go on talking too much, that you don't seem to read socials, and that your social cues, and that you seem to be just full of yourself? And he's like, well, my brother. And I'm like, you should listen to your brother. You should listen, and who knows what his brother's like. But if his brother had the honesty to tell him that, the way I phrased it, then, man, I think you should listen to your brother and get your demons out. And I said, yeah, we're all dealing with demons to some extent. Maybe I could be, anyone could be to some extent, but I think this guy has some serious narcissistic demon, attached itself to his head. And he described, and by the way, I know I'm all over the place in this video, but that visionary experience he said on the bed, where he heard some voice telling him, you are dead. He said that there was, after that, some pressure on his body, on his chest or something, pressing down on him. And that's a common thing that demon-possessed people report. That goes back centuries. People that's like the demon on your back, or the people report that in bed. The demon is crouching on you. I'm just saying that's a common thing that people have said. I pray to God that I'll never have that experience. I pray to God that God banishes demons from my presence, to be honest. I do. But But yeah, I mean, that's just something I've heard that people say. So for what it's worth, I just thought I'd throw that out there. So when I'm hearing this, I'm like, oh, well, that's nice to know. Yeah, that's not a good sign. So eventually I just had to be very honest with this guy. But you're kind of dealing with like a demon, or like a real person who's kind of demon possessed. And so you can only go to a certain point. You have to like start distancing yourself. But anyways, I think I made most of them. Yeah, the last point I would say is that he appealed to common sense very vaguely. I asked him about because he was all about science, and like I said, oh, it's saying that it's all about science and things are automatically better now than they were. Like sure, like we can say in certain ways, science has gotten better since the Enlightenment or since the Industrial Revolution. But I mean, come on, I mean there were like the spirit. I was trying to tell him like, well, look at the spiritual level of humans. Can't you see that this is Babylon? And he's like, well, Babylon was an ancient civilization. It's like, yes, it was, but the idea of Babylon can be resurrected, and they try to resurrect it. Like, what do you think building the Tower of Babel was? Like, what do you think is happening right now? And, I mean, okay, maybe you would say, well, it's not happening again, but at least there's some idea, there's some semblance there. There's some parallel to what's going on again. Oh, he was talking about cycles, so like that's why he liked the whole bicycle thing. The bicycle wheel, because everything's going around in a cycle. I'm like, no, I don't believe in cycles. I believe in history and revelation, and there's a certain set framework we're dealing with here. But the whole I don't. So yeah, he's flirting with all of these like Eastern ideas, kind of, and just his own intellectual understanding. Because he said he had a science background at one point, and at that point. This was after I was already pretty much calling him out. At that point, when he's bringing up that he came from a science background, he's trying to go on the offensive and also defensive, because he's trying to establish some authority over me. He never came out, talking about as science from the beginning. He came out from the starting gate as more of a weird, Gnostic, Eastern, somewhat semi-weirdo. But then by the end, I was, he's going more into the science, so I can see that. And I'm asking him, like, well, what's your opinion on Darwin? Like, do you believe that man came from the apes? And I asked him that, and he's like, he just goes off talking, and he won't answer the question. He won't answer the question. And I know you can refuse to answer questions, but he's like, I believe that things come from whatever, and it sounded like what they call theistic evolution, but he didn't say it. He wouldn't even bring himself to say it. He wouldn't bring himself to say, look, I believe that man came from apes, but that's how God created man, because really it's a symbolic thing, or it's the same spirit of man, or some interpretation like that, which is BS, but at least you could appreciate that, okay, well, at least you said it. At least you gave a real answer. Not a satisfactory answer. I don't think Darwinism makes any sense, but at least if someone could be honest about it. But no, I'm like, maybe he knew he wouldn't do well. I would just call him out on it. That's a slimy, slithery thing to do. These people are manipulative. These people are possessed. Establish a firm boundary with them. And by the way, he knew my name because he asked me, and I told him my name. Maybe you'll say that was a bad idea, but I told him my first name, in a friendly spirit. I never asked for this guy's name because I couldn't care less what this guy's name was. I couldn't care less who this guy is. Anyways, I don't mean to sound like such a negative video. I don't mean to have such a negative end to the video. But we do have to realize that evil is a real thing in the world. And it's not, I mean, we're using the word narcissist, but, it's not always just a strictly psychological condition. It's a bit deeper than that. But anyways, hasta luego, amigos.